Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So you'll recall that when I'm sitting in this place, I've been talking about a text called The 108 Gates of Dharma Illumination, which is included in the 12th Haskell version of Dogen's Shobo Genzo. It's a piece of a larger text called the Sutra of the Collected Past Deeds of the Buddha, which somehow got picked up kind of wholesale and set down into the Shobo Genzo. So if it was good enough for Dogen, it's good enough for me. And it's kind of a useful text. So today we take up the 10th gate of these 108 gates. Mindfulness of Sangha is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it attainment of the truth is steadfast. So we've again moved into this section now where we're talking about the three treasures, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So last week we talked about mindfulness of Dharma, and today, ironically, with a very small and intimate Sangha, we're talking about mindfulness of Sangha. Mindfulness of Sangha is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it attainment of the truth is steadfast. So let's consider first what Sangha is and the various meanings of Sangha, and then let's talk about what it means to be mindful of Sangha. So as we saw last time, there are three kinds of three treasures. Hojo-san talks about these sometimes. We've talked about three meanings of Buddha and three meanings of Dharma, so today, of course, three meanings of Sangha. So the Sanskrit word Sangha means a group of people who are unified by something. So the word itself is not necessarily always used in a religious context within Indian culture, within the Sanskrit language. In fact, I noticed just the other day, I saw a new app, or I don't know how to do it, I saw an app called Sangha, which is for teachers and parents to stay in communication about what's going on in their schools. So they're creating another kind of community. They call the thing Sangha. So, well, that's interesting. So it's a collection of human beings, which is unified by something. In our case, of course, unified by the Dharma. So laying this out across the three kinds of three treasures, as we've heard about from the Kyoju Kaimon, which is Dogen's comments on the precepts, he talks about these three kinds of three treasures. So the manifesting three treasure is the Sangha as the original group of human beings who practice with Shakyamuni. So after he wakes up, has his awakening experience, of course he spends the rest of his life traveling and teaching people, and he acquires quite a large Sangha. He starts out with just a few. Over the course of his lifetime acquires a number of people in his Sangha. So this is the historical Sangha, the first Sangha. The Kyoju Kaimon says, those who learned the Buddha's Dharma are the Sangha treasures, so the people who originally practiced with Shakyamuni. The maintaining version of the three treasures is here in this room, right? This is us today practicing as a community. The people who come together to sit, the people who come together to study the Dharma, and on that basis we go out into this world and try to move ourselves and our communities and our world toward wholesomeness. So it's not only the Sangha that's practiced, we're not only Sangha when we're practicing here, right? We're Sangha when we're out in the world doing our bodhisattva work. In the Kyoju Kaimon it says, those who relieve others of all different kinds of sufferings and release them from the burning house of the three worlds are the Sangha treasure. So this is the Sangha today. The absolute aspect of three treasures, in this case Sangha, is really all beings, right? All beings are our Sangha. Sentient beings, non-sentient beings. All beings are our Sangha. In the Kyoju Kaimon, the virtue of peace and harmony is the Sangha treasure. So it's not even necessarily about beings. It's about how those beings function together, which we'll see in a little while. There's quite a direct link between beings and the functioning of beings in this absolute aspect of Sangha. So I want to say a few things about each of these kinds of Sangha. So as I say, after Shakyamuni awakened, he went back to the 5 monks he'd been practicing with right before his awakening, started to explain to them what he had awakened to. This is the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma, right? So he explains to them the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, and they are at some point able to accept this. So maybe that's the original Sangha, these 5 folks. And of course, he collects more people as he travels and teaches. So ultimately the Buddha establishes a Sangha so that people can practice without the kinds of distractions and responsibilities that go with being a householder in the world. Because of course his Sangha was made up of laymen, laywomen, ordained men and ordained women. But the idea of this container is, especially for the home leavers, you can practice in a way which is not, your attention isn't pulled around by other kinds of responsibilities. Also, the Sangha is really what is charged with preserving the teachings and sharing those teachings and spreading the Dharma. This is the container for collecting up what Buddha said, right? This is where sutras are collected and first written down long after Buddha dies. So this is the group that's really the keepers of the Dharma. This is the resource for the Dharma in the world. And of course, traditionally, this is where translation happens and teachings are spread along the Silk Road and around the world. This is the activity of Sangha. This would not be happening without Sangha, right? So because the members of the Sangha are practicing in an upright way, they're knowledgeable folks, they're kind of living wholesome lives in the Dharma, they are said to be worthy of receiving gifts and hospitality when they need that, offerings, respect from others. So there's this exchange happening. We have Sangha members living an upright, wholesome life, sharing the teachings, in return receiving offerings from those who are receiving the teachings. That might be lay people, but in a large sense, Sangha is out there doing the work of the Bodhisattva and somehow being supported in that work. So what that upright, wholesome life looks like originally in the early teachings is defined or described by 227 fairly complex main rules of conduct. So there were some guidelines about how to live in a Sangha and how to be a member of a Sangha. And we today, when we take the 16 precepts, that's a descendant, if you will, right? A development of that. So we still have guidelines today about how do you live in the Sangha, whether that's a Sangha within a Zen center or the Sangha of all beings. So there's also a real element of Shila, or ethics, involved with the discussion of Sangha. So today in the Mahayana schools of Buddhism, we use Sangha to refer to all the practitioners. We say something like the Western Buddhist Sangha. Whoever is practicing is part of our Sangha. In the early teachings, in the Theravada teachings, Sangha refers only to the ordained people or to the people who have attained a certain kind of understanding. Those, of course, are not the same, right? This doesn't mean anything, perhaps. There are certainly ordained people who have greater or lesser degree of understanding. There are lay people who can be have quite a lot of insight, right? So, one way or another, these were the folks who were considered part of the Sangha. So in Zen, the word we use for Sangha is Sorin, S-O-R-I-N, long O. It's a Japanese word, Sorin. Takes its meaning from a group of different kind of trees. So here in the Sangha, we can think of ourselves as a group of different kinds of people, right? So in the forest, lots of kinds of trees and plants grow together. Different shapes, different sizes, some are tall, some are wider, different colors, they have different fruits, different leaves. So they're interdependent in their way. Some plants need more shade, they grow under the things that are larger, some need more light. So we have all different kinds of beings, all different kinds of plants in this forest, all different kinds of beings in the Sangha, all practicing together, living together. Interdependently, right? Living one life together in that place. So Sangha is made up of all different kinds of people practicing together, different levels of experience, different skills, different kinds of wisdom, different kinds of compassion. But the main thing is Sangha beings, Sangha members are living and practicing together in a harmonious way, in a peaceful way. So they use their various gifts, their various skills, their various experiences for the benefit of everybody in the small Sangha and in the larger Sangha. So certainly here Hojo-san has talked about how as Bodhisattvas we use our karmic conditions, whatever they may be, to go out into the world and do that Bodhisattva work. So each of us in the Sangha has different karmic conditions. We've had different experiences. We're here Our paths are slightly different, that have gotten us here, and yet we're practicing together harmoniously, like a group of trees, different kinds of trees. So now that we've given some thought to what Sangha is, what is this mindfulness of Sangha? So mindfulness, again, in our tradition, is simply about something that's remembered. In essence, it's not forgetting to practice. In a broad way, mindfulness is simply not forgetting to practice. So we bear something in mind, in this case, Sangha. Not forgetting what Sangha really is and what beings are actually part of the Sangha. So mindfulness of Sangha is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it attainment of the truth is steadfast. So mindfulness of Sangha, it seems to me, means remembering that we're not alone. And it's so easy for us to forget that in some ways, right? So there are two sides to that, I think. One is that we have support because we can rely on Dharma friends when we need to. So we're out there practicing not completely by ourselves. And certainly when folks come here from out of town for retreats and we meet them and talk with them, one of the things we frequently hear is, I practice by myself where I am. I save up all year, or I come here a couple of times a year so I can have some experience of Sangha. Because it's not easy to practice by ourselves, right? It's not easy to get on a cushion every day and to remember what Buddha taught and to experience the Dharma out there in the world without some kind of support, without some kind of container. So the other aspect of that is what we do affects other people. And it's sometimes easy to forget that as well. Whether that's about our practice in a really kind of a narrowly defined sense, or just about how we live in the world, what we do affects other people. So to have mindfulness of Sangha is to remember that we're not alone when we need help, and we're not alone when we act in the world. There's some effect of that, which moves people toward wholesomeness or moves people away from wholesomeness, creates suffering or ameliorates suffering. So in all ways, we're not alone. When we're deeply aware that we're not alone, then we remain steadfast in our practice, and we help others to remain steadfast in their practice. So when we need help to stay on the path, to stay committed, to make the effort, that help is there from our Sangha friends. And also, we're doing the same for others. The fact that we're practicing makes it a bit easier for others to practice. Whether that's somebody sees us and is inspired by our practice, somebody needs some practical help with their practice, we simply are a calm and steady presence in the world. The fact that we practice makes a difference. So we can be reliable, we can be solid, we can be committed to this practice because of Sangha. So Westerners, in my experience, sometimes don't want to find a Sangha when they start practicing. It's a lot easier, I think, or safer maybe, to just stay home and read Dharma books and maybe watch a video about how to sit, or listen to somebody give a talk, and to do that in a really kind of isolated way. Because we don't want someone telling us what to do. We don't want someone saying, there's this part of practice that you're not engaged with, and you need to be. Right? We'd like to pick and choose. This part feels okay to me, this part feels scary to me, I really don't want to do that part, so, I'm just going to do my own kind of thing. And that might feel comfortable. But that's what teachers are for, that's what elder brothers and sisters in Sangha are for, right? To point us in the direction and say, there's something we're not considering. But we don't want to engage in that. We want to choose what we want to do. So, we kind of want to stay away from this thing called Sangha. And usually, on that basis, in my experience, one of two things happens. Either the person ultimately gives up because it's just too hard to practice, or the person says, I need a Sangha. I got to go find a Sangha. So again, when people come here from out of town, they say sometimes, I've been practicing by myself for, X amount of time, and I finally realized I need Sangha, and so I'm here. And I'm glad we're here for them. It's one of the things we offer not only nationally and internationally, but lately regionally. There are a number of small sitting groups in this region. Some of them don't have teachers. They're all volunteer run. I admire the commitment it takes to stay together. And if we can help here at Zanshin supporting that, then that's good. We're part of their Sangha as well. So folks need to find a Sangha in some form, whether you only visit once a year or you can come like we come here every week or more. So when we join a Sangha, our initial explorations of this tradition stop being sort of a philosophical exercise and start being a real practice. Because here's Dharma, you're in a group of people and you're practicing together. Suddenly this is real life. There's other people in the room. We're all sitting zazen together. We're all discussing Dharma together. We're all supporting each other in practice. And suddenly this is not something out here we're kind of looking at through a microscope once in a while. Suddenly this is our real life. And I think Sangha really brings that home for us. It's really important in that way. So, Dharma is right here and now. It's right here in our practice. It's in our practice together. It becomes really very apparent that we're not alone, whether we believe that in an intellectual way or not. It becomes really apparent, the connections, the interconnections, the interdependence of a group of people practicing together in one place. So my first trip to Japan was as a layperson with a Raksu. And I was fortunate that I was able to visit a Soto Zen temple with a group of Western people, and just like for the afternoon, I wasn't training or anything. But we had a chance to look at the temple and hear something about the Dharma and sit zazen. And I thought, well, this is going to be magic. I'm sitting zazen in a Zen temple in Japan. This is going to be... Of course, my takeaway from that was zazen is zazen. We were sitting, I was doing the same sitting I was doing, in the US, but somehow I have that memory of thinking this was going to be somehow very special. But after zazen, as it turned out, they were having a little chanting service, and so we got to go to the chanting service. And of course, I understood nothing because it was all in Japanese. But yet, my memory of that, my takeaway from that was, of course, all the bells were in the same place as the service in English that I was used to doing, and my body knew what to do. I knew when to get up, I knew when to bow, I knew when to move, even though I understood not one word of what was happening. And what I realized in that moment was, my gosh, we're all doing the same practice. I mean, it sounds like a no-brainer, but to be in the middle of that and have that physical experience of practicing with others, even though I'd never practiced with these people before, they spoke a language I didn't speak, I was in a temple for the first time. I was in that temple for the first time. But I really remember that feeling of, my goodness, what we're doing in the US is exactly what's going on here. And my body can just fall into that, right? We really are practicing together all over the world. It was quite a powerful experience for me. And I really felt like I wasn't left out. Even though, here I was a Westerner in a Japanese temple, I didn't feel like I was left out. I felt like our practice is encompassing all of us. And we're all doing this practice together. So that was... It was a helpful experience to sort of remain steadfast in this practice. I think sometimes in the West we can maybe feel a bit isolated from the tradition because we're doing things a little bit differently. We're speaking a different language. We're having to modify things for our culture, for the spaces that we're in. And yet somehow we have this worldwide Sangha, which is, I think, quite encouraging. So when we first come to a Sangha, probably we're coming because we're looking for some support as individuals. We're suffering in some way, or we're curious about something in some way. We have some questions about our lives. And when we come to a Sangha, that's our main reason for being there. We want answers to our own questions, or whatever we're exploring as individuals. So when we come first to the Sangha, we come in and sit down and do our thing, and there's somebody lighting a candle, and there's somebody ringing a bell, and there's somebody offering a talk, and we sort of come to benefit from those things, and then we go home, right? After a while, though, we start to become aware of the issues and the questions and the activity of the Sangha, which is bigger than our first sort of immediate need, our first immediate experience. We start sort of looking behind the scenes, and going, wait a minute, there's an annual budget. Wait a minute, there's a roster of volunteers doing stuff in the place. Wait, there's questions about how do we maintain our facilities? Or, what should we do with facilities? Or should we sell our country land? Or, I've been in Sanghas where there were some big questions about facilities. We look around and see that some people are managing retreats. Some people are teaching Zazen to beginners. Somebody's putting Zendo guidelines up on the website. Suddenly there's this whole universe of activity, which includes our individual practice, but there's just like stuff we don't think about. when we simply sort of come in as guests, or we come in as consumers or something. And we all start that way. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's very interesting how we become embedded in the Sangha. And then we start to see the larger threads of activity. And we say, there's a bigger community here. There's a bigger set of community activities. There's a whole community of stuff here going on that includes me, but that's bigger than me. So I've been practicing for about 6 months in Minnesota. I just started my practice. I've been going about 6 months. When I was recruited for the board of directors. There is no escape, right? There is no escape from the board of directors. But, since I hadn't been practicing very long, I certainly didn't know everything there was to know about a temple. And wow, what an eye-opening experience that was. Because I remember going to my first board meeting and being handed an agenda and some things to be talked about. And we weren't sitting around talking about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. We were talking about our finances and staffing and insurance, and you just think, what? This is not what my practice is about. But suddenly that was what my practice was about, because that's how the Sangha works, and that's how we take care of each other. There was just so much more suddenly going on for me in that temple than, Sunday morning zazen and a Dharma talk. It was just stuff happening 7 days a week, all the time, because these were the issues of the community. I remember what a interesting feeling that was. It's like intellectually, of course that's true. But when your practice is about, I come on a Sunday, I hear a talk, I go home, you're just never exposed to those things until you've been around for a little while and you start looking. So of course there's this whole larger community of stuff going on in a Sangha. One of my early mentors used to say to me and to other people when we would come to practice, well, it's good you're here to lend your spirit. It'll be great to have you here to lend your spirit. And I used to think, yeah, hearts and flowers. That's just something you say to people to encourage them to show up. So it took me a while to really get how important that is, to come and lend your spirit. Wow, there really is something going on there. It wasn't till sometime later that I started to see how that works. So Seido Roshi, the head of the temple where I trained in Japan, said, I don't think there were so many practitioners at Koshoji, which was Dogen's temple. It was a small group. Dogen Zenji mentioned that we should not call a sorin big or small depending on how many monks are practicing there. It's not a matter of number. Dai sorin, or the great sorin, means that there is even a small number of people who have the real authentic spirit of the way. The spirit is the most important thing. So it isn't about how many bodies are in the room. It's about, do we have the spirit of the way? And can we bring that spirit and lend that spirit so that there's a collectively larger Sangha spirit that supports people when they come to practice? Turns out that's actually important. It's not just about bodies in a room. We're bringing more than that. So it really all came home to me, I think, when I was running the Milwaukee Zen Center, which had been around for, at that time, about 25 years. So it was a well-established Sangha. Had been in the same place for a long time. When I was there, I was there had been a founder, there was a resident teacher, and I was sort of filling in for a couple of years as the practice director, so I was in charge of the place. And attendance during the week was notoriously light. Whether that was early morning zazen in the evenings. I saw a lot of people on Sundays, I saw a fair number on Saturdays, I didn't see much going on during the week. And people would say to me, well, I would come if more people were coming. And I said, so wait a minute, you're all sitting home waiting for somebody else to make the first move before you come. Okay, somebody's got to break that cycle. Somebody's got to break that cycle of hesitation. So I would say to them, well, if you came, others would come. It's like we got to start somewhere, right? There's something about coming into an empty zendo and you just think, well, I shouldn't be here, or something. Where is everybody? So somehow, in order to encourage everybody to practice in a steadfast way, it's like somebody has to go first. Somebody has to show up, so that when other people show up, they feel comfortable. They feel like there's practice going on. Of course, when we practice for a while, we understand if it's, you and the teacher and the Jikido and the Zendo, that's still really strong practice. But when we're getting started, or when we need a little bit of support, and we, kind of walk in and there's nobody there, we wonder what's going on. We don't yet see, perhaps, that we have this global Sangha, which is practicing all the time. So Thich Nhat Hanh says, the Sangha is made out of the work of individuals, so we have the duty to help create the energy of the Sangha. Our presence, when it is a mindful presence, contributes to that energy. When we are absent during the activities of the Sangha, we are not contributing to Sangha energy. If we don't go to a sitting meditation, we are not feeding our Sangha. We are also letting ourselves go hungry because we are not benefiting from the Sangha. So as members of the Sangha, it seems we have some responsibility to show up occasionally and just lend our spirit, to bring our practice energy to the Sangha, to help ourselves, but also to help our friends in the Sangha. So when we're here, we don't have to be ringing bells or making tea or cleaning the zendo. Those are very nice things, but this is not about doing volunteer work. This is not about getting people here so that somebody cuts the grass. This is simply about getting together in the zendo to practice together, to remain steadfast on the way for ourselves and for others. And just to be present, to support that network of practice. Because no matter how few people are in the zendo, there is a network of practice, and we are a part of that, and we can help with that. We all know that the energy is quite different in a zendo when it's a zendo full of people, or when it's just you and the jikido and the teacher, perhaps. It's not better or worse, but it's different. We all know, for instance, when we do the World Peace Ceremony here, and we have a zendo full of people chanting, there's a lot of energy there. That's quite something. And this week, sometimes it's me and a jikido in the morning, chanting. That's not better or worse, but it's a different kind of energy. It's helpful to have both, right? So as much as Dogen Zenji said it doesn't matter whether there are a lot of monks, a lot of practitioners, or only a few practitioners, the reality is that if you arrive in a zendo day after day, and it's you and the teacher and maybe a jikido, it can feel a bit forlorn, right? It can feel a bit lonely. You wonder, there's all these empty cushions, what's going on? So it's a little harder, I think, to take refuge in a Sangha that's a bit invisible. So, of course, it's a two-way street. We have some responsibility for the Sangha, but also that Sangha, again, provides container for our own practice, so it's helpful to just put ourselves in the middle of Sangha for the support of our own development. So I would argue that it supports our development in several kinds of ways. As I mentioned, I think last week, Sangha can really be a source of encouragement and support and inspiration. So if we see people ahead of us on this path, older Dharma brothers and sisters who are just a few steps ahead of us on this path, if I see somebody farther down the path than I am, I feel like, well, if they can do it, so can I. They're sort of blazing the trail for me. I can follow in their footsteps, I can watch what they do, I can learn from what they do, and sort of support my bodhicitta, right? My aspiration to awaken. So I feel like I want to keep going. I see people ahead of me, I feel like I want to keep going. I don't know about you, but I've certainly had mentors in this practice that inspired me. I'm sitting here today because of what I saw people ahead of me do. Oh, somebody went to Japan to train, I can do that. Oh, somebody soda raksu, I can do that. Somebody came and sit zazen every day. Oh, I could do that, right? It's really important to have that kind of encouragement. Certainly Sangha can provide us some practical help. Gee, I have a question about my zazen posture. I have a question about this book I'm reading. I have a question about whether it's time for me to take precepts. I want to talk to somebody about that. Sangha can provide those kinds of practical answers, which can overcome the obstacles for us as we're trying to remain steadfast on this path. We need somebody to just answer those practical things. In this country, where we're not born into a Buddhist culture, we pretty much all need to start at the beginning and learn the really basic stuff. So when I'm answering the emails that come in to our general email address, people are asking all kinds of things. Everything from, do you ordain people and how do I do that? To how do I start sitting? What should I be reading? All of these questions are coming in. So it's helpful to have a place to go for that, and that's one of the things Sangha provides, right? We're the container for the tradition and for the practice. Certainly Sangha, I think, reflects our practice back to us, which is really helpful, because where else is that going to happen? If we're in a group of people who are on this path, trying to live in the same way, this is not what we typically encounter out in the world, right? So it's really helpful to have people who can look at our practice, experience our practice, and reflect that back to us. Whether or not that's a teacher who's doing that in a very kind of intentional way. Simply being in a group of people who practice, we get to see something about our own practice and help other people in that way. So I see my practice reflected in the responses of people around me. I need to take that into consideration and learn from that. So people who are on this same path, who know my aspiration and I know their aspiration, provide a little course correction as needed, whether that's somebody corrects your posture, or somebody says, you know that thing you said in that meeting the other day, not so skillful? Or, gee, you know, are you taking into account this or that that's going on in the Sangha? Our practice needs to be reflected back. So we don't get that when we practice by ourselves. If we're sitting alone somewhere, sitting zazen, and we're sitting like this, who's going to say, wait a minute, check your posture, you know? If we have some misunderstanding of something we've read in a Dharma book, who's going to say, you know what, you got that backwards? That's what our friends are for in the Sangha. So we need to know we're making effort in the right direction. We need to know we're being steadfast toward actual real truth, and not toward only our ideas about what we think reality is. Somebody has to help us with that. If it comes to things like developing leadership, which is a really important part of Sangha life, we're all leaders in some way. I don't care if we just come in the door. We're all leaders in some way in the Sangha. We can't develop bodhisattva leadership if we don't have people to lead, or if we don't have leaders to follow. So we need that kind of community to really develop practice in a wholesome way, in a steadfast way. Finally, of course, Sangha gives us the chance to cultivate some kind of response to the global suffering we see. And global includes this one, right? It doesn't just mean out there. So how do we cultivate some wholesome, meaningful, skillful response to suffering, which of course is what our practice is all about. So if I learn within the Sangha to act skillfully in the face of individual suffering or in the face of communal suffering, something's happening in the Sangha, something's happening with me or with my Sangha friend or something, then I get to take that understanding into the world as part of my bodhisattva work. For instance, this is one of the reasons I think board service is really important, which sounds kind of strange. In my ideal world, board service is a crash course in bodhisattva leadership because you're leading in a Dharma container. So look at the opportunity that's there. People may or may not take advantage of that in Dharma centers. But to me, it's a real opportunity. I don't see board service as separate from any other part of our program. To me, it's just as important in terms of Dharma development for individuals as, you know, a retreat or a workshop or a Dharma talk or anything. I think it's not separate. So again, it's difficult to figure out how to cultivate a good response to suffering without the experience of being in a community that aspires to do that in a wholesome way and has some resources for developing that capacity. It's helpful to be in a community that's willing to look long-term, or as the Native Americans would say, 7 generations, you know, rather than just going for the short-term kind of immediate response to something. If we're thinking broadly, if we're seeing clearly, sort of the one reality of all beings, and we're making our decisions and making our choices with that kind of viewpoint, that's a gift. I mean, where does that happen, right? So it's a real opportunity for us. So Thich Nhat Hanh says, the Sangha is not a place to hide in order to avoid your responsibilities. The Sangha is a place to practice for the transformation and the healing of self and society. When you are strong, you can be there in order to help society. If your society is in trouble, if your family is broken, if your church is no longer capable of providing you with spiritual life, then you work to take refuge in the Sangha so that you can restore your strength, your understanding, your compassion, your confidence. And then in turn, you can use that strength, understanding, and compassion to rebuild your family and society, to renew your church, to restore communication and harmony. This can only be done as a community, not as an individual, but as a Sangha. Mindfulness of Sangha is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it attainment of the truth is steadfast. We've talked about the manifesting and maintaining aspects of the Sangha treasure. We should say something about the absolute aspect of that. All beings functioning together in peace and harmony. That's the absolute aspect of Sangha. All beings functioning together in peace and harmony. So we've seen previously that the absolute 3 treasures can actually be separated. Absolute Buddha treasure, absolute Dharma treasure, absolute Sangha treasure actually can't be pulled apart. That's why they're absolute. In this case, the absolute Sangha treasure is the harmony of the awakened nature of all beings and the way they function according to the laws of reality. So all beings doing what Dharma does in this following the laws of the universe. That's the absolute aspect of Sangha. So we can see that the Sangha, or the universe, is one body. It's also many beings. So we have one big self, and we have many small selves. And they're not separate. And that's all Sangha. So just as the body is made up of cells, and yet it's one organism, Absolute Sangha is made up of all beings, and yet it's still one entity. Right? So both of these are true. If we don't have a deep understanding that there is no fixed, permanent self-nature that persists through time, and if we don't have a deep understanding of dependent arising, right, that everything arises because of causes and conditions, then we think we can do whatever we want in Sangha or in the world, because we just don't see that reality. We think we can take as many resources as we want for ourselves. We think we can take up all the space, figuratively or physically, that we want for ourselves, because we don't understand the true nature of reality. We don't see that we're affecting others. We don't understand interdependence. Well, if one cell in the body does that, it starts co-opting resources for itself. It starts taking up space. We call that cancer. It's not a wholesome situation. The whole body can die, right? And we know the same is true with the Sangha, or with the human organization. One person or a small group of people starts taking all the resources and taking up too much space, and that organization can die, or at least can limp along in a pretty unhealthy state for a long period of time. So Shila, or ethics or morality, are closely tied to Sangha practice. When we see the truth to which Buddha awakened, then our ethical behavior arises naturally. We don't feel compelled to break precepts because we see what's actually happening. We don't create disruption in the universe, or the organization, or the body. So the result is non-violence, it's non-harming, it's self-restraint, and it's harmony in the Sangha. So Shila is not something that's imposed from out here. It's not a set of rules somebody hands us that says, here's what you have to do, and if you don't do this, a bolt of lightning will come and, come after you. It's something that arises from inside, because we see how the world really works. It's a sort of an ethical compass that we carry around inside here. So when we follow that ethical compass, then we pose no threat to other people's lives, to their property, to their family, to their rights, to their general well-being, right? So non-harming arises naturally. We just do wholesome actions. We avoid unwholesome actions. We do the best we can for all beings. So if we can embody the precepts as individual bodhisattvas, then chances are we're going to build a wholesome society, or a wholesome organization, or a wholesome Sangha. Because we as individuals are non-harming. We as individuals are carrying out wholesome action, embodying the Buddha way in a particular way. So likely, the larger organizations of which we're a part are also going to be wholesome and healthy. So then we can take that practice into the world. We can try to create other wholesome organizations, and we all know this is not easy, right? Not a simple practice. So the absolute aspect of the Sangha treasure might seem like something that's abstract. It's this big thing about all beings and non-sentient beings and sentient beings. It might seem like it's kind of out here. And actually, the reality is it's all about the moment by moment by moment conduct of our lives. It's not separate from what we're doing with this body in mind every single moment. So all sentient and insentient beings are awakened. They all function according to the Dharma. And it's our job to see that we just don't get in the way of that. Minimally, that we just don't get in the way, right? Or even better, than as bodhisattvas, to help others not get in the way. So can we head off unwholesomeness? Can we carry some wholesomeness into the world? So Buddhism is full of teachings about cultivating virtues that lead to skillful action, lead to wholesome action, ethical action. You don't have to look very far. There are lists and lists and lists of virtues. Depending on what school of Buddhism you're in, some get emphasized more than others, but you don't have to go far to find guidance about that. So for example, in our tradition, we hear about the 6 paramitas, or the 6 perfections. So dana paramita, generosity, just giving of ourselves, time and support as that's needed. with no thought of, well, I'm going to get something back. I'm going to get a reward. I'm going to get a return. It's simply selfless giving. Shila Paramita is virtuous or moral behavior. So we're doing the right thing at the right time. We're exercising a little bit of discipline, staying steadfast, as we've been talking about steadfastness, staying steadfast on this path. Shanti Paramita is patience. It's tolerance for people. Sometimes that's really hard in a Sangha, right? Or even outside of a Sangha. But we have some patience for people who rub us the wrong way, situations that are out of our comfort zone, circumstances that feel a little bit uncomfortable. We can accept these things and go forward anyway, to the best of our ability. Virya Paramita is energy, strength, diligence, again, steadfastness to stay on this path, even when that becomes difficult. And sometimes it's difficult to stay on this path. Either we just don't feel like it, or things are arising in our zazen that we kind of don't want to deal with, and we just don't want to acknowledge. So, of course, job one, acknowledge suffering, acknowledge the reality of what's actually happening. And that requires some strength and diligence. Jnana Paramita, concentration, self-reflection, continuing to grow in this practice, being willing to sit down on the cushion with a spirit of inquiry and saying what's really happening in this body and mind before we drop off body and mind, or while we drop off body and mind. And finally, Prajna Paramita, we're all pretty familiar with as wisdom, understanding. It also means letting go of our intellectual pursuit and understanding in a different way. Embracing emptiness, right? Letting go of the need for only using discriminative thinking. So cultivating these things gives us a basis for seeing all beings as our Sangha and seeing the interconnectedness of all beings, how they function together. So can we see all beings as awakened? They are. Can we see that? Can we see how they're interdependent? And if we do something there, there's an effect across space and time over here, right? Mindfulness of Sangha is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it, the attainment of the truth is steadfast. So if we forget about Sangha, we forget about truth. We can't separate Sangha from the truth of the reality of all beings. This is why these absolute three treasures we can't pull apart. So mindfulness of Sangha is really important. If we forget about Sangha, we've forgot a big chunk of what the Buddha was talking about. We make mistakes, we create suffering, we create dissonance in the organization. So in the Vimalakirti Sutra, Manjushri is visiting Vimalakirti, who's a layperson, who's not well, he's in bed, and Manjushri asks him about the nature of his illness. And Vimalakirti says, "From ignorance we hold attachment, and my sickness is thus caused. Since all beings are sick, I am sick. If they are no more sick, then my sickness would cease. And why? A bodhisattva enters a life of birth and death for the sake of all beings. Where there are birth and death, there is always sickness. If all beings were free from sickness, then there would be no more sickness with a bodhisattva. Just as when the only son of a wealthy merchant becomes sick, then his parents, from their anxiety, become sick also. And when he is restored to health, then they also recover their health. Even so, a bodhisattva loves all beings as parents love an only son. As long as all beings are sick, he is sick. And when they recover their health, he also recovers his health. Again, you have asked about the cause of my sickness. The sickness of a bodhisattva is caused only by his great compassion. Right? So no separation between beings. If we can cultivate the wisdom to see that all sentient and insentient beings are our Sangha, and then we have the compassion to acknowledge their suffering and to actually try to help and to do our bodhisattva work. And that means remaining steadfast in this practice. That's how that happens. So we have to remain steadfast when we encounter incivility in the world, short-sightedness, divisiveness, false speech, misconduct, and a host of other sicknesses in our larger human Sangha. So Sangha is a group that's unified by something. We're held together by something. So no matter whether we understand it or whether we like it or not, we are indeed one absolute Sangha treasure. So what would you like to say about mindfulness of Sangha, or about Sangha as a whole, or staying on this path, or whatever is percolating for you? Please.
I appreciate get your thoughts, insight of how each of us bring a little something different. It's just, I'm acutely aware that I'm very different from other folks, and I see things differently. I've got a different history of thoughts and education, whatever. But I appreciate your thoughts, and I gave you some more insight on what's going on here with me and Sangha in general. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Your wisdom is just as valid as anybody's.
Good.
Right? Well,
yeah.
We're all here.
Different, yes, the same but different.
Yes, we're all here from various causes and conditions, and it's not possible for us all to be the same. So, in Japan, if we're training to do a ceremony, for instance, over the course of time, you have a group of people, we're living together 24/7, and in a way, we all become interchangeable, because we all learn the various roles, and we all learn the various jobs, and it's actually kind of a goal that we should all be interchangeable in that way. Anybody should be able to drop in, pick up any job. And so in that way, being individual doesn't matter, and yet, at the same time, we're all individuals. So there's a really interesting paradox there about, in order to completely manifest who we really are, we become completely one with the form of whatever we're doing. So in that way, we're interchangeable, and yet we're individuals, right? So both of those things will always be true. So please be you. Don't be somebody else.
Also, almost daily, it occurs to me that my Sangha includes my closest beings, my wife, kids, other family members that have played such an important portion of my life and continue to do so. And the responsibilities I think I have there, along with others and local Sangha, Soden, is that what you call it?
Soden, S-O-R-I-N, Soden.
Is that the multiplicity of...
That's the trees growing together. Yes, absolutely. It's a bunch of trees growing together.
I live in the forest. Sure.
As we all do, of course. So your particular kind of tree is different.
I like the variety of people that I have the privilege of interacting with and ask me for help, whatever. It's just not enough of me to go around, and I think Hoshin once said, "There's just not enough time."
Yes.
I don't have enough time left to do it all.
Well, certainly we have to prioritize.
Sure.
And I don't know about you, but some people I know struggle with, well, I don't get to the Dharma Center as often as I quote-unquote should, whatever that means. And they feel like on that basis they're not practicing. And of course our practice doesn't stop at the door, right? So we're practicing with our Sangha whether we're in the building or not. It's extremely helpful if we can all physically get together once in a while. But of course we're practicing with all beings whether we're here or not. Even, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I once did a sesshin by myself because I couldn't travel to where my group was at that time. Something came, I was supposed to be the Ino for the sesshin, and I couldn't go because something happened, but I'd already taken the week off from work. So I sat that sesshin, I followed the schedule, I did exactly what they were doing, and I wasn't physically with them, but yet I was practicing with my Sangha, right? So even if we can't physically be here, perhaps we can be doing what's happening here, wherever we are, and in that way we're still practicing together, right? So there's a number of ways to participate in Sangha.
Thank you. Normally I find that I heard a lot more if I just keep my mouth shut. But I felt I had a...
Of course.
Sure.
Of course. Well, again, one of the benefits of Sangha, let's share our insights, our understandings, our questions. This is what this time is for. To me, many people have heard me say, the Dharma talk is nice, but for me the juice is this part. Where human beings are throwing something out there and saying, here's my perception, what's going on. And it's not just me responding, we're responding to each other. I think that's how we develop a strong practice as a Sangha. Other folks, comments, questions? Please.
We often use that phrase, all beings. And I do too, when I'm talking, but I sometimes wonder exactly what that encompasses. When we say that, what are we saying? Does it even include thoughts, or like abstractions? What does it really encompass?
In my mind, it's not different from the myriad dharmas, and this is my own perception. Somebody could look this up and correct me, and I could be wrong. But when my response to when I hear something like all beings or all sentient, non-sentient beings is not separate from the myriad dharmas. It's all the little elements of our universe. So in my mind, sure, thoughts, yeah, I have some relationship there. They're part of my reality. They're part of the reality, and I feel like I need to care for them in a particular way, or at least not harm them in a particular way. Clearly see my relationship with them in a particular way. So last time we talked about mindfulness of Dharma being that we need to not forget our relationship with the phenomenal world. So I think that's, Sangha is in some ways, because here we are again, you can't pull these apart, is not different, right? If all sentient and non-sentient beings are my Sangha and I'm paying attention to my relationship with the phenomenal world, it's kind of the same thing to me. Does that make sense? What do you think about that? When you think about being all beings, sentient, non-sentient, what does that mean for you?
I guess, yeah. I guess there's categories of sentience. Those beings who can feel or have some kind of awareness or some kind of sensation, and then those that don't. But I tend to think of non-sentient beings as, physical, like stones or water or wind or something.
Yeah.
But the kind of more abstract things like thoughts or those, I don't know. To me, that seems weird to call them beings.
Yeah. On the other hand, so if you look at it, from the other side, if there was nothing outside of the Buddha way, if Buddha way is unsurpassable, there's nothing outside of the Buddha way. That means our Sangha doesn't have boundaries either, which means that whatever we encounter is part of our Sangha. So, in a way, making a distinction between sentient and non-sentient isn't important in my mind. If we're looking broadly, kind of doesn't matter. And we can call it a being, we can call it a dharma, we can call it whatever we want to. But if there's nothing outside of the Buddha way, then there's nothing outside of our Sangha.
Yeah, I guess it's just that, I quite often throw out that term all beings, but I don't really know what I mean by that.
Yeah, well, and I think that's true of various things in our tradition. We kind of have catchphrases or we have buzzwords or something, and then when we stop and think, well, what does that actually mean?
There's also like events, something that happens. It's very abstract in a way. Or processes or something.
Well, and of course there again, from our human perspective, we're putting boundaries around things and labeling it. This is a process, this is an event, and of course it's actually a functioning. So, of course, anything we label, now we're covering up reality in a way that's not entirely true. Is true and not true. So as soon as we start making distinctions, then we have those kinds of questions. I don't think they're bad questions, but sometimes we can go beyond the question and say, well, if there's no difference between all beings and myriad dharmas, then it's all my Sangha. But it's interesting to consider, isn't it? All those aspects of our lives and experience, if all of those things are beings, how does that change how I think about my relationship with all those things? It's no longer something I can just, oh well, now I have a responsibility because I'm in a relationship with it. So what does that mean? It's really an interesting thing to consider. Other folks?
I was just going to say, I think I read some kind of account of Abhidharma stuff, like the early sort of philosophical analyses of Buddhism. And I think that all the different sort of types of thoughts that can arise, we're all sort of systematized and
Yeah.
described as dharmas, so as beings, I guess.
Hmm.
So I think anything that you can think might qualify, if I remember it right.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Okay. Yeah, you're more current on that than I am, so thank you for that. I wondered about that. Okay, good. So we haven't completely gone off the path. Good to know. Anything else this morning? Okay, thank you very much.